Careful, please. That elite was an ultra.
Ancient evil awakens. Morals and ethics have changed so much in the last 10,000 years that the ancient evil is considered pretty moderate by today's standards. You may have noticed that there's a lot of conflicting quotes from the prophets. I recently was reading some of these conflicting quotes about the idea of daughters of perdition. You know, we always hear about the sons of perdition, but does sons include daughters? Because sometimes that can be the case, like especially in other languages, sons includes daughters. But in English, it's not always clear. Is it the children of perdition, or is it just the sons? If women can't become daughters of perdition, do they really have free will? I don't know. Based off their behavior, it's looking a little sus. All these social contagions seem to burn through the ranks of our beloved sisters. Daughters of perdition. It's an interesting idea. There's a lot of comments for and against. It seems a little strange to me that there would be none, because women are obviously capable of great evils. You know, women like to complain and say that they're not treated as well, and you know, we'll have to give it to them. They've killed way more people than men. So men have killed 1 billion people over the course of all wars in all of human history, approximately. And they say that women have killed 1.3 billion or 1.4 billion, approximately, since like the 80s. So clearly we're outmatched here. Prophets say conflicting things that don't agree and cannot be reconciled. And so I think that we as a people need to take in all the prophetic statements and from them distill the truth. I think that to simply say, oh, well, we're just going to follow who's ever currently alive, whatever alive means, considering we don't really believe that death is permanent. This cop-out of, well, just follow the living prophet, I think it is essentially moral relativism. It's moral relativism, but with like extra steps or whatever. So this just cannot do. The church is not only true, but it is also living. Does that mean that it degenerates? No, life does not degenerate. Life gets stronger. The wind blows at the trees get stronger. When you lift weights, your muscles get stronger. Shortenings, simplifications, de-emphases, this does not feel stronger to me. In 1820, God said, you need to go back. Return to tradition. I don't think that modern Protestantism is what God had in mind when he said there needs to be a restoration. And he didn't say, well, the problem with modern Protestantism is that their Bible is too skinny. Of course, we sustain our leaders, we want to follow them, but we have to realize that everything that the prophet says, all the church manuals that are being written are being scrutinized and censored by people who do not believe in the prophet. We need a new standard. We can't be moral relativists. I mean, if we can agree on anything, that is that moral relativism is bad, and as far as I can tell, has been universally condemned by the prophets. So that's something we can certainly agree on, is moral relativism is bad. The reason why I'm talking about women and also the prophets is because, you know, we live in this weird time where women get endowed without getting married, which doesn't really make any sense to me, considering what the endowment is and what is covenanted. Of course, the covenants have been slightly changed, slightly modernized for the women so that it makes sense. No one's getting married anyway, so I'm glad that women are getting endowed. Complicated topic. But the important thing is that women in the temple, they used to covenant to obey their husbands inasmuch as he follows God's commandments. It's kind of this authoritarian thing. As men, as patriarchs, we covenant to obey God. I would argue that in our covenant to obey God, there is this same sort of conditional nature, that we are to obey the Lord's prophets inasmuch as they obey God. In the same way that our wives covenant to obey us, we covenant to obey the prophets. If a husband was doing something wrong, perhaps he's, flirting with strange women or something, or doing something else that's inappropriate, that is inviting in negative things into the home, whatever it would be. It's irrelevant to the example, but I would say that it is the wife's responsibility to bring that to the attention of their husbands. Women make or break men. Like, a man who is single can be successful. But a man who has a disloyal wife, it's pretty hard for them to be successful. You know, at least half their stuff will be taken from them. These women, they can really kind of augment their husband. So whatever goals their husband has, a wife is a helpmeet, provided they're loyal and willing to obey their husband's commands or whatever. They can really be this synergistic thing. If their husband was to wander or to waver, it is the wife's responsibility to say, hey, your loyal wife here, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. I think that what you're choosing to do here is not what God wants. And when they do that, I think it makes their husband better. I think everyone can agree with that. That's kind of the point of these endowment marriage covenants. And so, the same sort of covenant applies to us as men who follow the prophet, that we are to follow the prophet and obey his commands in so much as he obeys God. This is a position that we can have, and it's not treacherous to the prophet. We're simply being real. Anything less than this is moral relativism, and it's just not acceptable to me. I can't do it. A wife that stood by while the husband does bad things is not a good wife, in the same way that the elders of Zion, if they stand by when the prophet does or says something that is less than what God desires for his people, I won't even say wrong, but just less, then it's their job to acknowledge that, and that's how they can help improve the church. The relationship between wives and husband can teach us a lot about how we are supposed to behave as subjects of our generation's patriarch. You know, we always talk about how women were oppressed in the past, and it was so horrible and whatever. I don't think this is true. Obviously, when there's plenty of suffering to go around, women suffer plenty. There's a lot of suffering in the past, okay? There's plenty for everyone. There's plenty for everyone now, okay? We don't need to argue about who can do more suffering, you know, like it's just, there's a lot of suffering. But what is true about the past is that we are here today because men and women worked together. Where men and women did not work together and did not do their part of civilization, things collapsed, you know. So yeah, men and women, they're totally different. And are men better than women? Are women better than men? Well, is fire better than water? Is water better than fire? I don't know. These are silly things to compare. They're just opposites. To try and compare them it's just downright silly. Obviously, both have their qualities. Both are necessary in the creation of the world. Without fire, man would die. Combustion is very similar to respiration chemically. So yeah, it's kind of essential. Water, kind of essential. These things are essential. If you're giving the same advice to your sons and your daughters, maybe reconsider that, because they are different. And you probably shouldn't be giving the same advice to your sons and your daughters. Maybe some advice is universal, but some advice needs to be specific to them for what they are, if that makes sense. Women have value that is inherent unto them. Women are just valuable. They just are. Society just values them. I think it's hardwired into your skull mainframe, whatever you want to call it, all the JavaScript running up there. We're just hardwired to value that. Now men, on the other hand, men do not have inherent value. They just don't. If you are 40 and you don't have skills and you don't have children, you're homeless, no one cares if you are a man. They literally don't care. You're invisible. And it's pretty tragic, you know. But that is just the way that it is. A man without skills, they are without value. Women's power is internal, whereas men's power is external. Men build civilizations, women build society. That's kind of a saying, but you need both. And right now, society is kind of sick. The fabric of society is the main attack surface, you know. We're having a societal war. It's not like a civilization war. It's an internal power struggle. I feel like women in a lot of ways are the problem with what's going wrong right now. Men do not leave the church. They go inactive unless they're married, in which the couple leaves the church. That's been my experience, is men who marry the wrong woman, they leave the church. I don't know why that is. Whereas men who never get married simply go inactive. And if they ever got married, then they come to church. Unless their wife is one of these women who's going to gnaw their way out of the church. Just an observation. Now, Part of that is because men these days are weak. We know that from studies that children will follow the religion of their father. And so I think a certain degree of that is that men are allowing themselves to be kind of led around by the nose by their wives. There's a really cool story. There's a funny movie too. It's called The Never Ending Story. You might have heard of it. You may have seen the memes or like the silly dog dragon thing. I like the book a lot. It was written by this guy who was born in like 1930s Germany. He grew up in a time where his parents were kind of getting dogged by all this political turmoil that was going on in the 19th century, or that was going on in the 20th century. The main character, his name is Bastian, and there's all this business with him needing to save the childlike empress, and there's this other kind of false empress. You know, she kind of poisons Bastian's mind. Everyone who listens to this woman, this false queen, they get afflicted with this thing called the emptiness. Anything that is hollow, that is empty, she can control. And so the more you listen to her, you will become empty. It's very surreal. Obviously, his dad was kind of the surrealist artist. You can see that influence there. I think it's a good story. You know, there's this idea of the nothing that they have to fight against, and what causes the nothing is that it's the faith of men in the real world. The faith of men is failing. And so the main character, Bastian, he has to travel into this world to breathe life into it with his own belief and to give it new life. Fantasia, I think it's different in the movie and the book. But, you know, Bastian, after the nothingness takes over the world, since he's a human, since he's real, and the world is a world of belief, his beliefs, his wishes, his faith basically makes him a god. He is tasked with rebuilding. He tries to correct problems, but in trying to correct those problems, he makes them worse. It's really interesting. Like, there's these worms that are always sad, and they create these beautiful silk structures. And they ask him, as if he's like God, to help them because they're always sad. And he says, okay, I will make you so that you are happy. The next time he runs into those worms, they've turned into butterflies, but at that point they're more like poltergeists. They're pranksters, and all they do is destroy, and they're always laughing. He tries to fix it with these wishes, but later in the story he always realizes that he makes things worse. So he just goes on all these adventures, he's making all these wishes, and he slowly becomes something that he's not by staying in this world of make-believe too long. And this woman, you know, poisons his mind and tries to convince him to basically dethrone this childlike empress, you know, this feminine god of the world or whatever. He wants to go after her, destroy her, and dethrone her. And she is the whole reason that he came into the world, is to save her. So he comes into the world to save the childlike empress, and by the end of the book, he's trying to wage war on her. He goes to a place called the Land of Old Emperors, if I remember. And it's like a nonsensical land. They build these kind of surrealist houses that don't make any sense, and people, you know, walk around with like buckets of water stacked up. Think of like one of those weird paintings, and that's like the world that it is, you know, like M.C. Escher meets Salvador Dali meets Picasso. It's something like that. That's the way it's described. It's very surreal. What Bastian learns is that every time he makes wishes, the cost is that he forgets something about his real self. All these problems that he's been trying to correct and failing, the cost has been his own identity. And he realizes that it's very, very urgent that he must get out of this land of make-believe. Otherwise, he will become one of these, you know, surreal NPC people, because all those people are real humans who got stuck in Fantasyland forever. And they've totally lost their minds, and they've totally forgotten who they are. They cannot create anything that means anything anymore. So he has to escape Fantastica, and he's running out of wishes, and he uses his wishes to try and escape, and like he eventually gets to the point where the only thing he has left is his own name. This creature, this flower woman, kind of nurses him back to health and helps him take the final steps to get out of that world. He can escape back to being a real boy. And when he gets back to the real world, he is now brave enough to confront some of these problems that he's been facing in his real life that he's been hiding from. Like there's bullies or something. I can't remember the exact details. There's something going on with his father and his bullies, but he's been like hiding in the attic at school to get away from these. And then at the end, he's willing to do what it takes, and he's become a man. So the whole thing is like a coming-of-age story. Really cool book. It's a story of faith. He's gonna travel to the world to save the world of faith, and he wants to save this girl, this childlike empress girl. He has to give her a new name, and he names her after his mother. He goes into the world, and he slowly becomes twisted by undoing things about the world that he doesn't understand. He makes things worse, and it's kind of like the idea of unraveling and deconstructing all these traditions that we have, that it's like, well, why do we do that? Why do we have these roles? Why do we have this tradition? And it's like, well, there's reasons, and you don't want to know why. To undo certain things is to invite upon ourselves and upon our generations, to use that sort of language. It invites upon us the same fate as all those who have disregarded these things in the past, and presumably they're all dead and gone. That's a little scary. You can try and do it, you can say these wishes, you know, like Bastion, but it removes a part of your identity. So the traditions are also part of our identity, will eventually become empty, and once you are empty, these evil women, succubi, or whatever you want to call them, with their inward-facing power, you know, their power that faces inward in the power structure, they can control you, and they can get you to fight against the very thing that your original goal was to protect. And so, very cool story, and I like the idea that as he unravels his identity by granting all these wishes to change his face, to change his body, to make himself smarter, and to solve all these problems in the world, he's losing who he was, and eventually the fate is to become one of these old emperors who has no purpose and builds ugly, nonsensical buildings. I find that extremely gripping as an idea because, like we've said, women's value is inherent, and their purpose in life is inherent. Like, obviously not all women have the opportunity to bear a child, but every woman who's bore a child, it's their whole life. Their meaning has all come to fruition, and women get a lot of hormone hits from taking care of children, nursing them, all these things that men simply do not get. They simply don't have those hormones in their head. When men build and create and work towards something, that is them fulfilling the measure of their creation. And so the idea of these old emperors where they create ugly buildings, it's almost like the antithesis of what a man should be. What is the greatest thing a man could aspire to? It is to build a cathedral, it's to build a house, it's to build a temple. Architecture is, I've heard it called the highest form of art because it's the kind of art that everyone looks at all the time, and it impacts the most people because most people don't go into museums, but the architecture is right there. The idea of building an ugly, nonsensical home, it's almost like the male version of like an abortion, in that it is the antithesis of kind of your purpose in life. Unfortunately, you cannot bring back pregnancy after you've terminated it, but you can demolish buildings, so it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison, but I just think that the story is really cool, and it teaches us a lot about what it is to be a man and dealing with some of these traditions. I just thought it was really cool, so wanted an excuse to talk about it. We live in an upside-down world. We live in the land of old emperors, essentially. This kind of meaningless, pointless thing where people are doing do-nothing work, making buildings that don't make sense. Our wives are being told that their purpose in life is to manage an Excel spreadsheet, become a cog in the machine, a machine that only works when all the little cogs mesh together. Who's helping our stockholders, Bob? You know, like that's what their purpose is. Men are being told that I am Knuff. He has inherent value. Both the role of men and women in our society is being distorted. Men are far more than pay pigs, and women are far more than HR. People ought to say, women need to get out of the workplace, you know, and that's true. Maybe men need to get out as well. Maybe they need to start their own workplace. Because inasmuch as you are working for Babylon, you're building up Babylon. And Brigham Young, you know, there's that quote, we've read it before. Welcome to the show where I repeat myself, but he says, not one more dollar to Babylon. I think that both men and women are living below their means as to what it means to be a father in Zion, what it means to be a mother in Zion. Women are not meant to be fathers in Zion, in role or identity, and the reverse is the same as well. You know, in England, during George I and George II's reign, there were a lot of mistresses. You know, guys were sleeping around, which was giving women more power because they have access to all the important men. They have rumors, they have blackmail, they have all these things. And so because of that, they were able to gain a lot of power. Along came King George III, and he said, no more mistresses, and suddenly women's power was reduced, inasmuch as they were getting power through these kind of illicit relationships. And I just thought that was extremely interesting when it comes to the patriarchal order being polygamous in nature. And a lot of people talk about polygamy as if it's this horrible thing for women. You know, they're oppressed, they're being treated like little robots, you know, Japanese robots, if you get what I'm saying. And I just don't think this is true. Was polygamy really bad for women? Or did it actually increase their power? Seems like there is a little bit of both. I think that in some ways it probably made women's lives better because they have teammates now. Can you watch the kids while I go do this thing? Okay, now I'll watch your kids while you go do that thing. It's all kind of built in. And is polygamy bad for men? I would say, yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways it is. Everyone says, oh, it's just these lecherous old men. There's a lot of negatives for men. There's a lot of really bad negatives for men. From all that I can tell, the same amount of men and women are born into the world, roughly. Maybe slightly more women, just barely. But this is why the whole sons of perdition thing doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems to me that polygamy is not sustainable unless it is done in very small quantities. Done in very small quantities, I think that it would have a very good eugenic effect on the gene pool. But done in large quantities, specifically David and Solomon are disavowed in the Book of Mormon for having like hundreds of wives or thousands of wives or something crazy. And yeah, that seems like a recipe for disaster. That does seem wrong to do these things in excess. It just seems wrong, especially practiced in great amounts. Polygamy does not work mathematically without war. And we do not want to live with war, okay? The alternative to war is like proselyting. So if you're not doing war or proselyting and you're practicing a lot of polygamy, you're going to create genetic diseases that are going to kill you. And so it seems not sustainable. Anyway, that's it. That's it for today. You can think about whether or not women have free will. The answer is yes. Is it the same as men? No, it's not the same. Are they going to be judged exactly the same for what they do? No, they are not. They're not going to be judged the same. You're going to be judged according to what you are. And what you are comes down to your spirit, your genetics. I don't think that men and women are going to be held to the same standards. And I don't really know what those are going to be. But I think they're going to be different. Certain crimes, certain sins, women may be punished more harshly for. And men may be punished more harshly for other sorts of sins. Things to think about. Obviously, God is a righteous, fair judge, and all will be judged fairly. Just some thoughts I had. Have a good one, and stay faithful.